Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Checkpoint Coffee, our gaming podcast. This time around, I've got with me Tasteen and Mika.
Hello.
Hey, folks.
And with this party of three, we're going to be taking on one of gaming's hot topics these days, right? We're going to be talking about Baldur's Gate 3 and the discussion surrounding it and its implications for the future of the games industry. Now, before we start really delving into the topic, I think it's a good thing to do to give people a little bit of background. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that was very recently released by Larian Studios, and it is a fantasy role-playing game, and it uses the rule set of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as the gameplay aspect of it, right? And what seems to be the problem here is that after the game came out, or just around the time it was coming out, there was a discussion created on Twitter about whether or not this game, which by all measures seems to be very well received, is something that players can expect as a standard going forward or not, right? Some people seem to think that, games should be like this, games should be more like Baldur's Gate, while other people seem to think that, no, maybe we can't reach it in this level of completion or content or, time investment per rewards for the player as this game. And I thought, so we thought it would be a good idea to just discuss this topic a little bit among us and see where we land with this as well. So you guys, I'm going to open the floor up to you guys. First of all, Baldur's Gate, are you playing? Have you played? Let's begin there.
Alright, so hi guys. So actually I myself have been playing Baldur's Gate since October, I think, and I've been playing since early access, so I've got to experience how Baldur's Gate was like prior to release, and I'm still playing it now, so I know how it is like after release. So this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I think like Baldur's Gate 3 is an absolutely phenomenal game. It's incredible. So in terms of like what the game offers you, it's like there's a lot of content and there's a lot of freedom for the players, because this is, as Moni has said, a very D&D game, so there's that as well. So yeah, my initial thoughts are Baldur's Gate 3 is exceedingly phenomenal game.
What about you, Mika? What are your initial thoughts?
So unlike the scene, and maybe you, Moody, I haven't actually had the chance to sit down and play this, mainly because I'm waiting for the console release. So my experience with Baldur's Gate 3 is relegated mainly to our streams, which we do on Twitch, by the way. You can see a link of it in the description below. But I have played the original Baldur's 1 and 2, so I intend to get it when it's released on console. But for now, I have no experience with BG3 other than the streams itself.
So, in case anybody was wondering, Mika is here to kind of provide us the outsider's perspective on this discussion about Baldur's Gate and what it means for other games, because that is something that we are kind of talking about today. Now, before we get to that though, me and Baldur's Gate, I've played it a few times. I played it on the PC mainly, and I must say it is fantastic. Well written, lots of character creation options, lots of fun decisions that you can make that'll just branch quests in very interesting ways. Seems really fun. But let's get into the meat of the issue though, what everybody's really here for. Let's start off with this idea that Baldur's Gate sets too high of a standard for the games industry. Alright, so with that being said, let's get into the meat of the thing. It all started with a Twitter thread by a game dev, which basically said that gamers should not expect Baldur's Gate to be like most of the other games in the RPG market. The person cited a long development cycle, 2 previous games which gave tech and institutional knowledge to draw from, successful early access period, and a huge team of developers, and license of one of the largest entertainment IPs, Dungeons & Dragons, as some of the causes for its success, some of the reasons, right? So I suppose the question I want to pose to you guys is, do you think that this argument is very valid? Do you think that there's something to be said about this or not? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so this argument is actually something that comes up from like time to time, because these days like it's becoming exceptionally rare for us players to have a full, fully packed AAA experience, right? There's always like something like microtransactions, so like it's not working, it's buggy. So back when Elden Ring came out as well, we've had like the similar discussion relating to how Elden Ring is, the UI, and we've had some developers from big companies saying that this Elden Ring UI, actually the user interface for the players, it's not very player friendly, so it doesn't have all the markers you would see in most of these AAA open world titles, right? So what we are seeing here with Baldur's Gate is something slightly similar, because when we are looking at Baldur's Gate, it's a very solid experience, right? No microtransactions present in game, no DLC. It's just a fully packed game experience for you, the player, where you can play it offline if you want to, and you would not be missing out any of the in-game content, right? So what's going on here is that when it comes to this conversation, people are saying that Baldur's Gate is the new industry standard, right? And rightfully so, because this is a very good experience. But on the other side of things is like the development and the commercial that goes into making a game this big, which is something that maybe most AAA studios would, surprisingly enough, would be lacking. So if we are going to really dive deep into this issue, the thing is that Larian Studios is backed by the D&D publishers, Wizards of the West Coast, Mooney, am I right?
Wizards of the Coast. Yeah.
Wizards of the Coast, yeah. There we go. But they have actually not provided any commercial funding for the project. They just gave them the rights to use the D&D license in order to make the game, right? So the full creative freedom was still within the Larian Studios developers and the creative team. But what makes things a bit different is there was an interesting article by Bloomberg, I believe, that Larian Studios is actually not as small as we think it is. It's about above 400 employees, and it's stationed in 6 countries, right? And the thing with Larian is a private company. It doesn't have any major shareholders outside the company that they would be sort of indebted to, right? They would have their own creative freedom. They would take their time to really plan out and finish this game. May take it 6 years or 3 years in early access. They can still do it because they had the full creative control with them, right? And the thing with most other AAA publishers is that a lot of them would be, let's say, held accountable for Wall Street, right? So if they are taking, let's say, 3 years in early access for a game that's going to come out in 2023, these people would be like, the CEO essentially would be in the hot seat, and the shareholders will be demanding, where's our more money? We are not getting any return on investment, right? So those sort of things would be realistically something that would come up in most AAA gaming studios these days, because right now, like, gaming is like one of the biggest industries out there, and a lot of these industries are, public companies. So that's basically the nitty-gritty of it from my perspective.
And the weird thing is, I don't think this is actually setting any standard. I think this is a return to form of how many people felt when they played games during the PS2 era. Even with Baldur's Gate 3, I know it's like really good content, especially for the first 2 acts. But if anyone's been playing for longer, you know that Act 3 is buggy and that it has its own fair share of problems. And that's kind of similar to what we had during the PS2 era. There was enough content that kept us occupied during the initial portions of the game. Despite its flaws, there was a, how do I put it? There was a passion behind the developers to bring whatever weird concept they had in mind. And now we're seeing that here with Baldur's Gate 3. So rather than setting a standard, I think we're actually raising the bar back to how it was originally. Like, this is how it was meant to be. That's how I feel.
I see. I would like to say something to both of those points. I think you guys have raised some really interesting ones. Now, from Dasin's perspective, you are right. For publicly traded companies, they are beholden to their investors, which is something that is a reality. Now, we do see the consequences of this when this goes to extreme lengths, right? Things like Cyberpunk 2077 or how there used to be an Assassin's Creed released every year. And like things like this happen because a lot of pressure comes from the investor side on the publisher side, right? And the developers are kind of caught in the middle. And we also hear about crunch and stuff that is a result of these like high expectations. So, I think that even though this is why a lot of these AAA companies are, how to say, under more strict parameters than a company like Larian, it is worth considering that to make games, it inevitably takes time, and the more time you do spend on them, the more polished the final product becomes. Now, obviously, if you spend like 100 years on one game, I'm pretty sure that may not be the case, but within reason, So I think that like in a day and age where we have a kind of culture slowly developing where we release games that are half finished or buggy and kind of patch it out, it is really nice to see a game that comes out that has parts of it that work really well and has a lot of content, as Mika said as well. And perhaps the real thing here is a call to return to perhaps giving developers or publishers a little bit more breathing room before they put out their next big hit. Because right now it kind of feels like they're squeezing the lemon dry on one end. Now, on what Mika said, I agree. It feels like this isn't something new. Like, I've heard about this, right? I've heard about games that have a lot of fun things to do that are really cool from in the get-go, but it's been a good long while. We've been hearing about so many bad PC ports. We've been hearing about games that need day one patches. We've been hearing about games that basically rescue themselves from the trash heap, like No Man's Sky, or from what I hear, Cyberpunk 2077. So it's nice to see a game that, I guess, for the most part works, 2/3 work. Like, I can't believe that's something worth celebrating, but here we are.
Yeah, so that's also actually we can draw some interesting comparisons when we are talking about games that are 2/3 complete and games that take long time in development, right? When we are talking about, let's have a little look back to open beta of Diablo 4, right? When Diablo 4 was in open beta, it was like the next big thing. Everyone thought, I thought, logging into Diablo 4 on open beta, that it was going to be a big hit, a big success. This is Diablo at its best. Blizzard is, back in the chair. They are making games how they used to, right? And then the full game came out, right? After the first chapter also, like, it fell off. It really fell off hard, right? I think what's happening with Baldur's Gate is that the first 2 acts are very good because you don't really go into the city, right? So when you go into the city, there's all these characters and all these objects that take time to render, and that will have a very very stressful effect on your computer, on your gaming rig, like however you put it, because it's not properly optimized. As we've seen in a video by I think there was a very detailed video by what were they called, Mika?
Digital Foundry.
Yeah, exactly, where they explore the technical details of Baldur's Gate 3. So that's also there, but we personally haven't reached Act 3 yet. But when we reach there, you guys will know, and we will be streaming as well to see like how our system holds up. And when we are talking about the development cycles, right, it's a very interesting thing, because right after Baldur's Gate, we are getting the AAA like big hit, right? We are getting Starfield, which has been like including the pre-production like 25 years in development, right? So if a AAA game, this is as AAA as it gets, can take 25 years in development and hopefully puts out a finished product, then there we go. Like, no complaints.
So Starfield is now on the spot because Baldur's Gate did well. That's an interesting thing to happen.
Yes, because I feel like these are very two different comparisons. But Baldur's Gate is developed by, it's largely still an indie company, right? Larian. When it comes to Larian, they are not as big as all these other publishers. But when it comes to Starfield, this is a AAA experience. It's a AAA big boy pants game, right? So it will be very, very interesting to compare these two games, because we are now talking about raising the bar, and let's see if this bar meets the expectations.
On the topic of raising the bar, there is another aspect about this game, Baldur's Gate, that I want to focus on. This one is a little bit more on the pricing side of things, all right? So I'm sure you guys are aware that with the new console generation, the average price of the AAA video game has gone from $60 to $70, right?
Yeah.
I think we're painfully aware of that.
Yes. So it is interesting to me that Baldur's Gate decided to come out, after the next console generation and still have the game be priced at $60. And it seems like the game is really making bang. That word of mouth and marketing and a lot of it is doing it a lot of good, right? So what do you guys think about this? Like, do you think it's some sort of statement like, hey, games don't need to be this amount? Or is it more like here's a game that's actually worth $60? What's your take on this?
So $70 video game pricing is like, it's becoming, as you said, like very common in the AAA area, but it's also worth noting that not all games are priced this way. For instance, if you are going to look at the next big FromSoft title, what's it called? I keep forgetting.
Armored Core.
Armored Core is also priced at $59.99. So it's not as high as you would be paying $70 for Diablo, but getting a really bad experience with Baldur's Gate, it's still the same standard pricing you would still pay for like games like.
And I feel like the standard has risen. Starfield officially signed on. Several other companies have been actually announcing that they would be going for the $70 price point, right? This was a bit of a news sometime last year and early this year.
So when it comes to the pricing, you would see that there are games like Diablo 4, you're paying $70 and you drop the game like 2 months later because it's just too unplayable because of how grindy the game is, or because it's just too much. So really there's not enough content there that's worth $70. But if you're playing a game like Baldur's Gate, there's too much. Like everything you do, it's endless. There's a lot to explore, and there's like replayability value is exceptionally high. So when AAA games, like we've said, when they are being priced at like $70, most of the time it comes out half-baked. Like the game is burger without the cheese and without the ham, right? It's just buns. That's the state of the AAA industry right now, and you are getting like $20 DLC and then you get the buns, right? Or if you look at cases like Cyberpunk 2077, you are going to get the full experience like 2-3 years after the original release date. And yeah,
we had to endure the first couple of patches to see how good the game got, and it went from unplayable to sometimes playable. Good job, Punk.
So whether it was the intention or not, it does actually make a statement, because on the one hand, I feel like companies which are charging like $70 or $80 for the deluxe edition, it almost feels like they inherently understand that, okay, we don't have enough content, it's buggy, it's messy, we need to price it high to make a return because people are not going to keep buying this. So outcomes like Baldur's Gate, and on another note, on August 25th, like Armored Core.
Yeah.
And these are all priced on $60. And I feel like in some ways, even without it being their intention, they are kind of making a statement that like, hey, our content is good. We're going to make back even with $60.
And funnily enough, this comes after a very messy, like some really bad mess ups from the AAA games. Like, I think you guys still remember Golem, right?
Golem. I was so disappointed because I was actually hoping like after Hogwarts Legacy that might have been good as well.
All right. So I think you might be right, Mika. I think whether they intended or not, it is kind of making a bit of a statement here, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the people who decided that games were $60 was the AAA industry after all. So now that they decided that the price should go higher for Larian and then eventually FromSoft to come out and sell games $10 cheaper and still make a lot of money, I think says a lot. Because for FromSoft, we know them quite well. A lot of their games feel very complete. There's a lot of content in them, and you can really get engaged in it. And with Baldur's Gate, we are now seeing that Larian designs these kind of games as well. Anybody who played Divinity Original Sin 1 or 2, or both, would be able to tell you that as well, right? So basically, just the idea that when you get a game, you really get, as Tahseen said, not just the bun, but also the meat and the veggies and the lettuce and every other bit that goes into it, for that satisfying chunk. I think that's something we could all do a little bit more of.
Exactly. Now I'm hungry.
No arguments with that.
Now, on the topic of video games and pricing, there is something that I want to bring up. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on it. What do you guys think about the idea that over time, games have gotten less like pricing-wise, something that you pay once and then you enjoy as much as you want, and more like something that you have to continuously keep paying in small amounts? Like, I feel like there's been a trend towards that side of things, right? And the fact that a single-player game that is not online in the traditional sense comes along and is able to make a lot of money, I again think is another thing worth talking about. What do you guys think?
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the truth of the matter is that all the single-player games that we like that we as gamers consider hits, like God of War, Elden Ring, they actually make less than live services. And there's pretty much the crux of the matter. The truth is, even if a live service is bad, if you manage to keep your population around, if you manage to keep your customers around, you actually make a lot more for less effort from those games. And yeah, it's going to happen, and it's going to keep happening because the shareholders, the company, they see the profits. This reminds me of, Tahseen linked me an article the other day from, was it Bloomberg?
Bloomberg.
Yeah, Bloomberg. And they were basically saying that Square Enix did not feel like Final Fantasy 16 was a success, despite everything and every review everywhere saying that this is a good Final Fantasy game. Like, it made 3 million in sales, and that is amazing to me. Like, you made 3 million in sales, and you still don't consider that as a success. And I think that sets the benchmark of what they're thinking of success, because Square Enix also delves a lot in live services, both on like the MMO platform with 14 and on mobile games, because they make bank on mobile games a lot.
Yeah.
So basically, what you're saying is that at the executive level, there is some sort of misalignment of expectations when it comes to these games and the return that they should make, right?
No, it's actually when it came to the Final Fantasy 16 topic, like when it came out and after the initial run, people were reporting Final Fantasy 16 is a disappointment, says Square Enix, and Square Enix actually came out and said, no, Final Fantasy 16 is a resounding success from us, right? It hit its benchmark, we are satisfied with the game. And then we see articles from Bloomberg and other publications saying Square Enix, their share prices have gone down, they are displeased with the Final Fantasy 16, right? So me and Mika, what we did was we had to download these documents and we had to go through each of these to know how much they made and what Square Enix really said, right? And Square Enix never said Final Fantasy 16 was a disappointment. All they said was it reached the targeted sales, it hit the benchmark, we are happy with the product. But this is not how it's been reported. This is not how it's been published, because the publications and I think other media outlets like Bloomberg, they feel like, if it is a single player story driven AAA video game, then it will, by default make less than other games, right? Of course, it's not going to make as much as a live service game, but the crux of the meta is it's not meant to, yeah.
So there isn't a misalignment of expectations this time.
There's definitely a misalignment between what we as consumers consider a success and what a company considers a success. Because when they tweeted out that they made like 3 million copies in digital sales, I was like, okay, yeah, that's pretty damn awesome, right? But to them, it wasn't. Like, that's amazing to me, to be honest.
So when it comes to like a live service game and when it like single player story driven offline games, right? We've actually made a video about the evolution of like how these live service games really, became a commonplace in the market as well. And like Mika said, live service games will continue to be a norm, and they will continue to make big paying, they'll continue to make big money as long as this live service trend continues, right? Because it's all about like keeping the player in loop. It's all about like, setting the expectations, keeping the carrot always at the next milestone, the next content update, the next keyword update, and there will be more things to expect. There will be more interesting things to look forward to. So the players will spend a little amount of their money, maybe $1 a month, maybe $5 a month, to make the experience a little more easy, a little more fun. So when players start investing this money, it becomes something like a gamble, right? When these big corporations who are looking at the money, they will think, okay, so this is how we are going to differentiate these players, right? We are going to like have these players who spent a certain amount of money, call them like, this is the dolphin area, this is the whale area, these are the big spenders, and they will always like target their content towards the bigger whales, the bigger spenders, and that's going to continue, right? And at the end of the day, like Elden Ring, God of War, all of them, like these games are resounding successes, right? Even we can count like games like Baldur's Gate 3, right? But at the end of the day, when you look at the mobile sales market, when you look at games like Fate Go, or when you look at Genshin Impact, when you look at like Honkai Star Rail, these games will always earn more than these single player story driven games.
Now, you've mentioned a lot about how games like this get quality of life and patch updates and stuff to make them better. But it is also worth noting that sometimes for some players, they play them purely because of sunk cost fallacy. That is to say that, oh, I've already spent $400 in this game and spent $32, so if I quit now, all that would have been for nothing. I'm sure that for some of you, this will be a very familiar sentiment, and what to say about that, huh? I don't really know. But this idea that you raised, Sasin, that they will always earn more, kind of a sad prospect, because clearly the market is also crying out for some other kind of games. But I suppose we will see who ultimately wins out in this tug of war between publicly trading game companies, publishers, and the audience, which weirdly enough exists now. But let me just take this conversation to wrap things up to the last part of what we'll be talking about today. We've talked about whether Baldur's Gate should be considered a new industry standard. We've talked about how games are priced a little bit. With all that being said, before we wrap things up, I want to bring up one final facet of this discussion that's been taking place online about Larian Studios and Baldur's Gate and how it pertains to the future of gaming. There are some critics of this game that are calling it an anomaly, right? Something that, let's say, is very different from what can normally be expected. This is similar to that standard conversation, but it's the idea that, oh, you shouldn't expect games like this anymore. This was just a fluke. It won't happen again. And the reason why I bring this up is because there is a counter argument that is being made that I find quite interesting, which I would like you guys' view on. And the counter argument goes that anomalies or unusual games that innovate are what really pushes gaming as a whole forward. That if it wasn't for, let's say, I don't know, Resident Evil 4, that we might not have had over-the-shoulder camera angles the same way that we did. If it wasn't for GTA 3, we might not have open-world game design the way that we do, right? So what do you guys think about this idea of unusual games or anomalies, flukes, really, and the effect they have on the game industry? Do you think that flukes should be ignored, or do you think that this is the thing that really keeps the game industry fresh? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's actually true. Like, it's the anomalies that usually always, rather than anomalies, I'd say it's always that weird little game, like, that's always trying to innovate, that makes a dent in the industry. The problem, however, is that despite this being the case historically, companies always like to take the safe route, right? The safe bet, like, this made money, we're going to copy it. And I'm afraid as gaming as an industry has gone like even larger than the cinema industry, that they have even less reason to innovate. And so we're going to see less and less of these anomalies. And then when one comes around, they are like, okay, lower your expectations. We can't do this. It's as if they almost try to justify their development style because their style is the less risky one. Well, stuff like Baldur's Gate and the like is more risky.
Yeah, so same like Mika said, games as an industry have become like too big. I feel like they've become too successful because the innovation has really, really taken a backseat. When we see games like Baldur's Gate or Nier Automata, we are like, oh, this is a really good experience. Games should do this more, and then comes out the next Assassin's Creed game, the next Call of Duty game, and then it's the same. If you usually play these AAA titles, it's just it's the same burger with a different sauce. It looks the same, it feels the same.
You're really in the burger metaphor out there. It's really going places.
Yeah. Which is why, like, if you look at specifically indie games, they've been like really innovative on this front, like trying out very wacky new things, right? But
if I may interrupt here, that's like one of the games which was released this year was Hi-Fi Rush, and I felt like that was really innovative in the rhythm game genre. And despite it being so successful and reviewed so positively, I doubt we're going to see a Hi-Fi Rush copy anytime soon.
No, Mika, we actually it had the same reception as Final Fantasy 16 when it comes to sales figures, right? Hi-Fi Rush was very successful. It did quite well considering the scope of the project, right? But a lot of people were saying, this is a failure of sorts because it's not selling that well. It's not selling as these other big AAA titles, right? So
is it? This is this is actually in the first time I've heard it because everyone was saying like Hi-Fi Rush is like really good, and I think I even saw on news of them saying they reached a sales milestone like really recently.
Yeah,
that's very happy to hear.
They must have, because I remember the developer actually coming out to Twitter and saying, look, we made a good game and it's successful. Like, it's the same as, same as Square.
It's this one. They mentioned that they reached 3 million players.
Yeah. But there has been some pushback from the gaming audience, from the community saying, this is not popular. This is not going to sell well. Even if it is selling well, even if it is very successful and making numbers, there will always be the gaming community, and sadly it's sometimes the majority that's taken this stance, because I feel like as gamers we've become very comfortable with these AAA big half-baked games, that we feel like this is the standard now, right? You pay for the bun, you pay $70 for the bun, and then you pay additional $20 to get the meat and the rest of the ingredients later, right? To get it delivered to you like 1 year later, to show for them to come to your doorstep and be like, hey, here's the rest of your burger, right? I'm making a cyberpunk reference again. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm honestly really surprised that people consider Hi-Fi Rush a failure.
Yeah.
Like, that game is so good.
I hear what you guys are saying, and a lot of this stuff I agree with. Tahsin, one thing I want to add on to the end of what you said is, recently I had a bit of a discussion with a friend about some changes that have been coming to Genshin Impact, right? Some quality of life changes and things that this friend is arguing, hey, better late than never, right? And he says, I've played enough of these games where the game just gets no support from the developers, so I'm just happy to see that this game, even though it does have problems, is still inching forward and becoming slightly better. I told him that I recognize his opinion, but I told him that considering the amount of money that this company makes, like on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, the amount of innovation to me is just not enough, because they could be doing so much more. Like, one of the ironic things about Genshin Impact, in case any of the audience don't know, is that if you see anything you don't like about that game, there's a very good chance that there's another game by the same company, Hoyoverse, that has the thing fixed or does much better. And that's really weird. We constantly make a joke like, hey, Hoyoverse, why don't you take this thing in this game and make it like this. It clearly works. But, my point here is these people make a lot of money. They have multiple games that do this, and yet the amount of progress is just like so very minuscule. So is this really the best game they can make? And, maybe they're not really trying to make the best game they can make, which brings back Mika's point that they do go for these safe bets, right? And it also ties into what Tahsin said about how gaming has, in his opinion, gotten a little bit too big. And I think one thing that's worth considering is that unlike a lot of media out there, the experience we have while playing the game matters a lot more or in a different way than compared to, let's say, reading a book or watching a movie. So as long as the experience isn't very good, it's really not worth the money, is it?
Yeah.
And with this, finally, our conversation today comes to a close. I hope you guys had some fun listening to us discuss Baldur's Gate 3 and what it could mean for the future of gaming and the games industry as a whole. We really went places, and a burger really went places during this podcast as well. You guys, I'm feeling good about this one. What about you?
Yeah, I think we've had a really detailed conversation about the entire gaming industry in general. Even if you're looking at the commercial perspective, how these companies are being run, who's the people behind the curtain pulling the strings, So yeah, I think this conversation has been very, very fruitful.
Yeah, pretty much. I doubt there's a gamer out there who actually disagrees with our statements. But well, it's interesting to see the devs and everyone being on the other side of the argument.
It's actually a very beefy conversation, wouldn't you say, guys?
Burgers.
Oh my god. Okay, now with that, I am also gonna say that yes, I do, like Mimika said, I don't think a lot of people disagree with this perspective, and here's hoping that we get a lot better games in the future. That is the thing that we're always going to be hoping for. So with that, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Checkpoint Coffee. See ya.
See you guys.
Take care. That's gonna be it for this episode of Checkpoint Coffee. Thanks for listening, folks. Give us a like and subscribe if you're listening to us on YouTube. We'll meet you again next month for more gaming and pop culture reviews and discussions.